Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the Google Next conference here in San Francisco, in beautiful Moscone West.
Yeah, it's very here with like somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 of our closest friends.
Yeah, all in Moscone West.
That's right. Yeah, they packed him in this time.
So this show is going to be very freeform. It's just Brian and I, and it's honestly just impressions of the event so far. We actually went to a community day. Google was nice enough to ask us out for a community day, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the first 2 days of the show, we haven't, tomorrow is actually Ramji's keynote and kind of the open source keynote. So we're not going to talk about that one today. But we will talk about today was the big announcement day, so that's probably what we'll spend a good bit of time on. So, Where do you want to start? You want to start with the community day?
Yeah. So I think the biggest takeaway for me from the community day was it was run by Ramji and Sarah Novotny, who Sam is now a VP of product for Google Cloud.
Yes.
Had previously been at Cloud Foundry Foundation. Sarah, who runs sort of Kubernetes. I never get this right. I don't know if it's Kubernetes in Google or if it's for the Cloud Foundry Foundation.
I think it's community of, yeah.
Yeah, so
question.
She sort of runs a Kubernetes community.
Sorry, Sarah.
You know who you are. But it was. I think so they were trying to do two things. One, I think they're trying to form a more diversified sort of community group. So they have a sort of experts group, but they're trying to, get different perspectives there. And then the other big thing for me was, there was definitely a very clear focus that open source and sort of openness is going to be something that will be front and center, right? They want to make sure that they're actively contributing to communities. Obviously, they do things around Kubernetes and some of the big data stuff, but they also kind of want to reiterate this idea that they want to be an open cloud, which is a little different than a lot of the other ones where it's sort of like, I want to get you into my cloud as quickly as possible. It feels like they want to give people some options.
Yeah.
So, it was positive. It was a lot of really good access to the engineers and having, just open conversations. How do these technologies work? And they wanted feedback on, what people were trying to do with them. And so it was good. It was good for Google to be reaching out to people and trying to build some of those bridges and get into different communities.
Yeah. And I also figure out too that it felt to me a little bit too that they were very receptive to input, that they kind of have an idea of where they're going with a lot of this openness. But they also wanted to make sure that, really get our feedback of, is this what you want? Is this what you were thinking? Yeah. And very receptive to it all. Sam has hosted numerous kind of, chats, if you will, where it's just kind of him in front of the room. And it's a little bit of trial by fire. And it's been really, really good to have a leader at that level, just so open-minded and saying, hey, what is wrong? And how can I go fix it? And in addition to that, I like the concept of, okay, there's the openness from a technology standpoint, of course, but the idea of openness in that, more than one Google person at the community day mentioned on-prem with Kubernetes and kind of your data where you wanted and run things where you want to do it. It wasn't just there is one answer and it is the Google Cloud.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's two parts of that. I think part of it is obviously positioning, versus an Amazon, and people get concerned about lock-in. I think the other part of it is, at least I hope it is, like, I think there are certain parts of Google, maybe the Google Cloud team, that sort of realizes, like, not everybody's going to be like Google. Even though they would like everyone to operate and think and do things like Google, it'd make their life a lot easier. I think there's a certain recognition that they do things very, very differently than, most IT organizations and most engineers and stuff. And so I think having these sort of open discussions is a check on their going to, being too googly, if you will. But, look, just having an open channel and knowing Sam is really passionate about getting feedback, I think is a really good thing. And I think, for people that are, curious about the Google stuff, he seems to be very open and receptive, and Sarah is as well. And, people should reach out through them and give feedback and, ask for things and tell them what you want and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were your thoughts around the show itself?
So I'll sort of compare it to last year. So I got a chance to go to the event last year.
How many was it last year, by the way?
I want to say it was like 1,500. It might have been 2,000. So
Right.
So it was decidedly smaller.
And they published 10,000. I don't know that there was 10 here. It didn't seem like there was 10,000 seats in the keynote, but I'm not going to...
Yeah, I'd probably say closer to 6, maybe.
But we can
7.
say it's a multiple.
Yeah. It's at least twice as big and maybe 3 times as big. But so it was very interesting. So the day one keynote last year, the big thing last year with Google was they came out and they were going to tell you just how awesome Google was, how awesome the engineering was, and they were going to show you use cases and customer examples that were like global scale. So it was Coca-Cola took 19 trillion photos and they turned them into this collage for the World Cup, and they did it like in 2 days. And they were going to talk about how like Spotify or Snapchat was doing global scale stuff. And you walked away from it and you went, engineering wise, really cool. I don't know how big a market there is for global awesomeness, right?
And how does that relate to me?
Right, yeah, exactly. Especially to the mainstream IT organization, if that's what they're trying to be, is sort of an IT replacement. This year, I think they listened to the feedback they got. I think they may have over-rotated a little bit because day one was, we're going to talk about customers, and they're going to be, they kind of went out of their way to be like, we have boring customers, we have mainstream customers, we have enterprise customers, we have old customers. And, I think it was good that they listened. They talked somewhat about technology, but it was, Colgate Palmolive and Home Depot and Disney and, so names that you knew, but a little bit of an over-rotation on, the coolness of Google. It was more the, hey, we're mainstream Google. So,
Yep.
They'll figure that out over time.
I would also add, too, so it almost seems like there was the next step, if you will. If the first step was, I'm going to put up all these hero numbers and tell you how cool I am.
Yeah.
Then step 2 was, okay, no, we really do have customers, we promise.
Right.
But then it still suffered from but why do I care?
Right.
It had customers, but it didn't. It was the basic features versus benefits thing. Like the benefits still just didn't quite hit home.
Right. Yeah.
So when you look at AWS keynotes, or you look at some of these other big industry keynotes that we've been to over the years, I mean, keynotes tend to have a pretty specific format over time, and
Yep.
we've seen enough of them. We kind of go, that was not
Yeah, they didn't. They didn't. I think we would have expected a couple basic things, like, what's the state of the business? Like, if you're not going to give us revenue numbers, like how fast is it growing? How big is it? How much are customers using it? Give us some sense of like,
is it the next Google Wave?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
and it's going to get canceled,
right? Exactly.
Like we don't know, right?
Right, and so they have to do that because at this point, people are like, well, there's a big 3, and I roughly know what Amazon looks like, and I know what Azure looks like, and I have no idea what Google looks like. So you can call them a big 3. But I don't know if that, people have said to us, like, do you think they're 3 or 4 or 5? Is it a distant 3? Is it so they got to work on that. But in contrast, you look at what happened today, and today was sort of back to we are an engineering powerhouse. We do really awesome things around big data, really awesome things around machine learning, AI, and it was like this 180-degree transformation. They had great presenters, they had great demos, it was well organized. And if you were a customer and you walked away from that, you went, if I think data analytics or machine learning or any of these things could help my business, like, you had to walk away really impressed from that.
Yeah. And they also seemed to, so there was almost 2 levels of the message. There was the super forward-leaning, machine learning, AI, big data, all of that. And then there was actually a super traditional message in the, take your VM, no matter what the hypervisor, and live migration it straight into the cloud with no downtime and a boring old app that, through Apigee and, APIs and this and that. And there was a lift and shift message as well. So you almost had a extremely old school and then extremely forward-leaning all at the same time in the same keynote.
Right.
Which was a little like, huh. And then the security one, too, and I'll talk about security in a second, but the security stuff was super interesting, too, of like they're doing everything they can to make sure no one ever uses a VPN ever.
They had a really cool thing where it was they called it like an identity proxy, but it was basically like get rid of your VPNs, which was really cool. And then they did this data loss prevention thing, which was really slick.
Yeah.
In terms of like making sure credit card numbers and social security numbers don't leak out into places, and really automated, probably using all the vision APIs and machine learning in the background. But yeah, I think if you come back to this thing of like, do they speak well to customers in terms of like communicating value and so forth? Like one of the biggest things I've heard from a number of people is like, should I judge Google based on how their keynotes go, or should I judge them based on like, having one-on-one conversations with them? Because if you do it just based on the keynotes, you go, I got whiplash 4 or 5 times. I'm not sure exactly what they want to be. But if you sort of step back for a second and look at what the technology offerings, you look at some of the cool stuff they're doing around like, more flexible pricing.
Yeah.
You go, wow. I mean, like this seems really, really compelling and interesting. So they've got to figure out how to find a better balance and make it more customer centric.
And I will say this though too, they didn't actually specifically call this out, but I definitely noticed this trend, and this goes back to other public cloud keynotes I've seen in the past of they did some really good objection handling. They in the fact that they went through a whole kind of new pricing model and simplified way to kind of do these use case discounts or something like that. I forget the committed use discounts is what it was, right? And basically it was, what's your objection? I don't know exactly what I'm paying, or I need, a PhD to do it, or somebody like, Matt Ellis from Cloudability to help you out. And you can't do it by yourself, and I want to. Okay, fine. We're going to remove that objection.
Yeah.
Well, they remove half the objection. They remove it from Google, but you still have to compare it to something, and comparing it to something else is still going to be nasty. But whatever, they're handling their objection, right?
Yep.
Then there is the objection handling of the lift and shift aspect of I can't put my workloads there because they're old and this and that, and they made it super easy to get data in and get VMs in, and so they let the ingest of data and applications, they've removed that. So there was definitely an objection handling portion of the keynote that was there, but they never explicitly called it out. It was kind of subtly there.
Yeah. I think the thing about it is like, Google's never been look, this cloud stuff, especially this side of the cloud, you're essentially an IT company. And IT companies talk a certain way because they think about the competition, they think about customers' problems, they structure their messaging a certain way. And like Google is an engineering company that's now offering their resources available. So there's a big learning curve, right, to how they do it. I think if let's say Amazon didn't exist and somebody walked into this show and said like, wow, here's what they do, and you were an IT shop, you would go, this is pretty interesting and compelling because it's like, they run things better than I do operationally, and they're going to be cheaper than we do, and they're really fast, and look at they're secure, and it's like, wow, okay, that's all cool, but you got to put it in the context of like, what else do customers have in their ear around an Amazon or any other traditional vendor that's talking to them? Like they're still they speak a different language, and that's kind of. But so just off the top of your head, like what sort of jumped out at you as being, really compelling or really interesting technology or some conversation you had this week?
Yeah, of all the things, actually, believe it or not, it was that security demo.
Yeah.
It was actually just a really cool, the DLP portion of it and the identity proxy, and it was more of like, I was like, that is actually really fundamentally different and cool.
Yeah.
And I really liked how it was integrated in with everything else, and that was a neat portion of it. And maybe it's more because I admittedly struggle with relating to some of the things they do at times where I'm like, oh yeah, machine learning, that's awesome. It's going to be great. Okay, great. What is that? But I mean, that was something legitimately I was like, oh, okay, I can see how that's going to make my life easier.
Right. Yeah, no, it was, and for anybody who wants to see it, if you go to their YouTube channel, they've been really good. They get all their videos online like immediately. Go to the YouTube channel, go to the Day 2 keynote.
Yep.
It's probably about 30 minutes in, and it's in sort of the beginning of the security section, so you can kind of watch it. It's a guy named Greg DiMichele who comes out and gives the demo. It's very, very, very well done, very well presented.
And I'll throw this one out as well, and then I'll kick it back to you. The other thing, though, that won't get talked about, but it was in the rooms and it was really cool, is they had screens on either side of the breakout sessions, and they were doing live transcription. Through the voice APIs, and it was actually on the screen, and it would identify who was talking, and like if a question got answered, and it was scarily accurate.
Right.
And it was just this really cool use of tech of, people that can't hear, or accessibility, and you don't have to go repeat the question because there's these big screens that's getting, that was actually, I was like, wow, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. I think the thing I thought that was pretty cool, there's, lots of cool tech if you want to bang into the tech. eBay did a cool demo, kind of building on the sort of voice OS type of thing, where they were talking to one of the Google Homes and basically sort of searching through all of eBay, using this just very human interaction. And, from my perspective, it's always sort of tough sometimes to translate, like, what would be an interesting business capability and then translate it into technology, and you need a PhD to figure that out sometimes. Like this is one of these things between like a speech API, a voice API, an image recognition thing. Like I can see business people starting to say, like, here's an experience I'd like to have as a customer call, customer center or the front desk of my hotel or whatever, and being able to go like, is that possible? And I think we saw this week, like, that technology is pretty darn good. Like it's very possible. You just
Absolutely.
You still have to stitch it together. But like that to me was really, really impressive.
You have a great point there in that, the future feels a lot closer.
Yeah.
Here at a Google conference.
Yeah.
Because you just see, you start to even like, oh, I didn't know we were that far along with this technology, and you start to see just some really, really cool applications of it, and you didn't even know you needed it.
Yeah. Well, and the one piece of feedback I would say is like you get that sense because they bring out some people who are, otherworldly smart PhD level people. The next step they have to take is to go, let me bring a customer on stage who's gone through that process and let's figure out how hard it was to use that thing. Right. Because if you can show people like this wasn't a Mount Everest level steep learning curve to use it, like that's huge because It's like, okay, we did democratize AI or whatever, catchword phrase they were using. So that'll be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, agreed. Anything else? So anything else you would kind of want to add there? Or?
No, look, there's a million cool things. Go take a look. We'll put some things in the show notes as far as the announcements. Cloud Spanner, the whole like global scale database is really neat.
I forgot all about it. Spanner looked.
Yeah, Spanner's unbelievable.
That was the kind of technology I was like, whoa.
Right.
From a technology standpoint, that was the coolest thing I've seen.
Yeah, global scale SQL that doesn't partition, that updates itself on the fly, and
yes.
So what's your takeaway? So we've now been to AWS shows, we've been to Google show, we're 6 years into this podcast. Like how do you see the marketplace at this point, just kind of given now where Google is trying to establish themselves?
I think for me the biggest thing is, for the longest time, I kind of thought, okay, we're going to eventually have this transition to public cloud.
Yep.
And and everyone kind of you kind of look back now and go, yeah, that's obvious. But six years ago, I don't know that it was that obvious.
Right.
Then there was okay, great, who are going to be the winners and losers? And we kind of went through that stage of it.
Yeah.
And then everyone just kind of assumed there's going to be a big three cloud, and that's probably true, but also they may or may not be all that differentiated, or we're probably still going to just be doing basic plumbing, and you're connecting together that plumbing, and you were differentiating on plumbing services,
right?
But the more and more we see these kind of keynotes and the industry change over the while, it seems like more the public clouds will each have their own differentiation, and they will not necessarily at times, they will keep up with each other on some services, but they will have their unique differentiators, and they will go super, super deep on those.
Yeah.
And, AWS, I would say, is, the IoT and green grass and some of those things. And here it's definitely machine learning and AI. And so you're going to start to see, public clouds that are good for general use cases, but then also differentiated clouds as well. And I didn't see that necessarily coming out until I'd say probably the last, 12, 16 months.
Yeah. No, I think they're definitely all, it's like you said last night at dinner, like they're definitely all taking this sort of somewhat divergent path as to what they're going to specialize in. The question for me becomes, do end users, customers, like want to deal with a whole bunch of clouds and like wherever their specialty is, or do they say, hey, their portfolios all look kind of the same and I'll just use, I'll pick based on some criteria, price or completeness or good enough or whatever it might be. I think that's
whoever builds an enterprise Salesforce and takes them out golfing.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and that we all know that golf drives a lot of stuff. Who goes to dinner? So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Does it become a fragmented thing, a winner take all thing?
Right.
But I think it's like you said, that the future keeps feeling like it's closer, and it keeps happening faster and faster. So it's like.
What's kind of yours? Do you have a differing or anything else you want to add there?
No, I think that's really good. I think the one thing we had a chance to talk with Rodrigo Flores the other night. We were at dinner, and Rodrigo runs Accenture and has really awesome cloud business over there. And the thing we were talking with him was if you're Google, your strength is going to be in these core technologies, but it's not necessarily in talking to people, and it's also not necessarily in being super interested in boring, sort of quote-unquote boring applications. It's going to be interesting to see how fast Google can ramp up a channel program that helps address those kind of applications, because whether it's an Accenture or whether it's a VAR, like companies that we know that deal with traditional things, like those guys are dying to go take a bunch of this business, even if it runs in the cloud. And Google, I don't know, has the stomach for that kind of stuff. But if you can pair together what you're good at with someone else who's good at certain things, like that becomes an interesting sort of thing. And I think that's critical for Google to be successful. I think Microsoft sort of has that in place somewhat. Amazon has that in place somewhat. And we saw things this week like Rackspace became a certified support organization for this. So people are evolving, companies are evolving in those spaces too. In the things that they're good at. Right, Rackspace is great at support.
And another thing about that too is we've talked about it somewhat on the podcast, but we have this running joke too of whenever we go to these shows, we actually you can tell a lot by the sponsor list.
Yeah.
And AWS, we've joked that's just the hit list. That's who AWS is going to take out next year.
Right.
But what's interesting here is the sponsorships is PwC, Accenture. It is more the very traditional services, consultancy building kind of sponsorships than it is a bunch of small startups trying to make a big play here. And the sponsorship list is very different, and in my mind very telling of they see this as an opportunity.
Yeah, I think those big...
Now, does Google? I don't know, but they do.
Well, I think you read into that two ways. One, I think the big systems integrators are smart enough, having dealt with the SAPs and Oracles and whatever, like all the money's in data. The money is in data, integrating data, big complex systems, and if Google can help you do this for the next generation stuff, that's pretty interesting. The flip side of that becomes, why didn't we see every SaaS company that we, sort of like IT SaaS service companies that we've seen at AWS, why aren't they necessarily here, or why aren't they? And I don't want to speculate, but that may also tell me that not as many people are using Google as are using AWS, and hence they haven't prioritized their services or their marketing towards Google and stuff. So, again, we're always trying to figure out how big GCP is. We don't have any real data. We're kind of guessing, but you kind of pull some proxy things and see if they make any sense. And I don't want to speculate, but it is, like you said, it's interesting that they weren't the focus like they are at AWS.
Right.
So any sort of disappointments this week? Anything you were kind of you were expecting and it didn't work itself out, or?
not to beat a dead horse too bad on it, but the biggest thing is I didn't come away with a feel of, are they growing? Are they not growing? How much are they growing? Like, that's the biggest thing is it almost feels like a big black box. And more than anything, the single biggest thing is if I just had some kind of insight into that, just to get a trend and momentum.
Yeah, and again, like if it's a $1 billion business or a $500 million business or whatever, like forget about that so much of like how much is it growing? How fast is it growing? Because we know Google doesn't lack for resources, but they do have to figure out how to get
Eric
started.
Schmidt on the Day One keynote kind of joked, but I mean, said it pretty seriously. What was it, $50 billion check or whatever?
Like $30 billion that he had invested in the system. So
it was tens of billions.
At some point, in order to be legitimate with your customers, they have to know that you're viable, right? And you just have to figure out some way to communicate that. And to me, the other thing that was a little disappointing, and not big, but a little bit, is in their serverless announcement, they went from, well, last year it was alpha, and this year Cloud Functions is beta.
Yeah,
and it's been a year.
Yep,
and like.
Serverless by the way, their beta is probably most people's GA.
Yeah,
and it's but it has that label and it has that stigma in the enterprise, and so no one wants to go near it. But at the same time, Google is like we were talking earlier. Google maybe doesn't have support ramped up yet, or they don't have all the things in place they want to call it GA, and so it was weird. It was really weird. It was like you moved so fast in certain areas, and then you went from an alpha to a beta. Well,
and it's one of these things like it's not as if the Google folks were saying like, serverless is a bad concept or anything. Like they're not downplaying it because it somehow affects their business.
No, there's actually a ton of sessions in the agenda.
Yeah,
I mean,
but the thing you have to look at is you have to go, okay, if the technology's not ready, like in the marketplace, the technology's not ready, then it's fine, it's beta. But Amazon's been in the market for 2+ years now. Azure Functions are now GA. There's a ton of people that are doing. I mean, we heard a number of stories about some large serverless stuff, not on Google, but that people are running their business on it. And if somebody goes like, "Oh, I want to do serverless, I want to work with Google," oh wait, they haven't figured out how to get it past beta. Like, what's wrong with them? Like, and that's not the that's not the message you want to get across.
Right,
Because,
it's
like
all
you said,
about perception.
Their beta might be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So I mean, at the end of the day, enterprises don't buy beta. So you want to sell to them. You got to get that beta tag off somehow.
Yeah, but the flip side, the devil's advocate side of that, though, is how many enterprises are really worried about it anyway. So if it takes another year to go beta to GA,
yeah. But here's the problem with that is we know that serverless stuff is going to be sticky.
Yes,
and if you're behind, you lose the stickiness.
It is a land grab.
It's never
You're
getting
right.
out. Right.
Right.
So you can't.
It is probably more so than any other public cloud tech, I would say right now. It's pretty sticky.
Yeah, I think so. So I don't know. So far it's been an interesting week. I don't know that I'm walking away from this like with a super great understanding of. I understand it better. I have. We know more people here now, which is great. There were a lot of positives that came out of it, but I don't know that I can totally put my finger on like. If I had to forecast what's Google Cloud going to look like next year, I don't totally know. Right? Like they rotated a lot one way and then they rotated the other way, and it's going to be interesting to figure out which balance they evolve to over the next year. I think that's the big takeaway for me is what are they going to be next year? Right? I know what Amazon's going to be. They are going to be a 900-pound service gobbling gorilla that wants to take over everything. I don't know what Google's going to be necessarily. I have a sense.
They still seem to be in that awkward trying to figure out exactly what they are stage.
Right.
Which is, considering the age of it, I can sit here and go, well, I can't believe they're not further along. But then I also have to go, well, when you look at the age of it, you look at the age of it, we kind of went through the exact same thing with the other ones.
Yeah.
And they're just they're a couple years behind. And so we kind of have to say, well,
yeah. I mean, the one thing
where are they at?
The one thing is like you look at Amazon, if just for comparison reasons, their learning curve after about 3 or 4 years just took off.
Yeah.
And took off, and how they deal with customers, how they price stuff, how they add features. We very well may see that with Google too, right? Get the right people running things, the right way to listen to customers, but that's my big takeaway is trying to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that probably wraps it up for now. So Brian, you want to take us out this week?
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, as always, thanks for listening. Like we said, we crossed our 6-year barrier and our 6-year anniversary this last month. We we have to thank everybody for listening all the way back to show 1 and all the way up to almost here 300. Thanks for listening. Tell a friend. Leave us a review on iTunes or on Stitcher or on Google Play. Send us feedback. Love to hear feedback. And, let us know what you want to hear from us. We've gotten pretty good at finding people that are really smart, and we just sort of need to know where to focus some of our energies. So thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.